They pledge to defend the law, represent the will of the people. But time and again, elected officials have sold their soul and betrayed us all for mob money. Some countries are little more than mafia nations. Once an organized crime group gets a grip on society, it is very difficult to break. Why? Simple. Crime bosses know that the secret to maintaining their power is to corrupt their greatest adversary, the government. Today, organized crime has been traced to all regions of the globe. One of the most distinguishing, albeit regrettable, characteristics of the 20th century has been the proliferation of organized crime. The transformation of the Mafia into an organization with a managerial hierarchy occurred when the fabric of America was undergoing a major alteration.
East Harlem was a really tough immigrant neighborhood. I mean, it was poor, it was violent, it was squalid, it was crowded, and really, the modern American Mafia, as we know it, was born up on those streets in the boyhood rumbles of guys like Luciano, Lucchese, and Frank Costello, and Vito Genovese. They all knew each other, and they were all in the same, what was called a borgata. Borgata means like a gang of delinquent boys. And every block in an Italian neighborhood had a social club. And when they walked past the social club, they saw something very different. Guys in suits, beautiful suits, fedoras, okay, Italian handmade shoes, big beautiful cars, women. Kids like Lucchese, they wanted to hang around, because what did they see? They saw the American dream, money, power. Nobody bothered these guys.
Once Luciano's boyhood gang became organized, they soon graduated from rumbles and petty crime to more sophisticated rackets. Soon the gangsters were rolling in cash. As this new mafia's power grew, they expanded into other rackets, gambling, prostitution, and narcotics. Law enforcement attempted to stop them, but the gangsters had already put their newfound wealth to good use, buying off policemen, judges, and mayors. Others were just too frightened to stop the growth of the mob. With the cooperation of local government, Luciano's crime syndicate established a stranglehold on the city. Luciano's story is not unique. The cocaine cartels of Colombia began in much the same way. Colombia's biggest drug kingpin, Pablo Escobar, forged a crime empire by corrupting his government on a massive scale. Escobar had a simple method of influencing judges and politicians. He would send an attorney to offer the official a choice, plomo or plata, lead or silver. If he did not take the bribe, he and his family could expect to get a bullet instead.
Because of his power and because of his, I would say, just brute force, he was able to influence a lot of people. The people heard, especially judges and prosecutors in Colombia, would hear the name Pablo Escobar, they would feel like there was a death threat and they would not get in his way.
At one point, there was no one in the entire country Escobar could not buy, silence, or kill. In fact, when he was finally convicted, officials on Escobar's payroll allowed him to build his own prison that was more like a hacienda. It's the same old story in Japan. Authorities are struggling to free themselves from the grip of the Yakuza. The Japanese syndicate has so entwined itself into business and government, the three are virtually indistinguishable.
They recruit the unemployed to the political corridors of government. They can be deeply religious, kind and thoughtful, but can be as ruthless as Japan's World War II image. They currently operate beyond the laws and in secret.
With the decay of the communist system, there is little left to separate the Russian mafia from the government. Corruption is so widespread in Russia that officials simply buy their positions and use their power to conduct criminal operations.
The Russians are particularly different than other mafia groups because they have a level of professionalism that really comes from their long record of being able to deal with a very difficult totalitarian system. They know how to get around it, they know how to get around the police, they know how to suborn and corrupt officialdom. And most of them are quite shrewd and intelligent businessmen.
Slums are often the home of neighborhood gangs of one type or another. But hoodlum gangs have become organized crime groups with billion-dollar assets. This happened in Jamaica in the 80s, when a street thug named Jim Brown teamed up with the nation's president. Brown came out of one of the toughest neighborhoods in Kingston. He grew up poor and hungry, but his appetite for wealth led to a life of crime that landed him in prison. His story is a classic example of what can happen when government officials become partners in crime.
Good day, Mr. Brown. The British Privy Council have reviewed your appeal. I'm afraid you lost. The federal marshals are on their way to extradite you to the United States.
They gonna wish they never did that. They all love the money I give. The politicians. They're the criminals. You want to eat in this country, you got to play by their rules. That's how I came to be locked up here. Playing by their rules all my life. You see, I was one of the sufferer youth.
The sufferer youth? Oh, that's the quaint phrase they give to the poor, misbegotten youth of... Forgive me, Mr. Brown.
You don't know nothing, man.
No, I suppose in a sense you are quite correct. Please continue. You were saying you were part of the suffering youth.
We had nothing. Not even enough to eat. The police and the government were getting fat off their own people. When that hurricane money came down to help the people, where you think it go to? The people? No, man, it goes in their pockets. We have to have crime to live, to take our peace back from them. We gotta have the posses to protect ourselves from the cops who are gonna kill us.
A typical childhood of a sufferer youth in Jamaica is a very frightening one, in the sense that many of that generation was simply not able to have access to high schools. I mean, their schooling would end at the age of 14 or 15. It would mean then that just housing would be a serious problem. Getting food on a daily basis would be a serious problem. Many of these people depended on remittances coming from abroad. I mean, that really sometimes determined whether they survived or did not survive. And of course, growing up in those communities with the level of violence, you really had to be tough in order to survive. It was very difficult to survive if you didn't develop a certain inner toughness.
The government gave you a good job building houses, didn't it, Mr. Brown?
You mean that welding shop on Milk Lane? And the only time I made money was during the elections.
The elections?
Look, man, it's not just elections here. The way things work in Jamaica is that neighborhoods get favors, like housing developments from politicians. To get favors, they got to vote for that guy when he's running for president.
I see. But what does that have to do with your welding business?
Man, where you come from? You don't think. Now, if you know where the neighborhoods are, they're gonna vote for your enemy, what you gonna do? You burn them out.
The posses came up at the same time as Jamaica's politics were polarized in the 1970s. By the time Michael Manley became Prime Minister in 1972 and Edward Seaga, the leader of the Jamaica Labour Party, had emerged as his nemesis on the right, the two men were really engaged in a vicious power struggle for dominance in Jamaica. Seaga's tactics were always known to be extraordinarily dirty. He was perfectly willing to use violence, and most Jamaicans will tell you that it was the JLP that really upped the ante of violence in Jamaica's politics in the 1970s. Michael Manley retaliated by developing his own garrisons, and the level of this warfare is almost impossible for an American to understand because it involves strategies and tactics such as burning people out of their homes. If there's an area that's known to be packed with supporters of one party and you're in the other party and you want to unseat them, you simply torch that neighborhood by night and shoot at the firemen as they're trying to put out the blaze. And when the blaze is over, you bulldoze the rubble and build a housing scheme, as it's called in Jamaica, a housing project, and you pack it full of your own supporters. It was a no-holds-barred, undeclared civil war. It was extraordinary in its viciousness, and Jamaicans very soon began to call it tribal war. Violence had become so much a way of life in Jamaica's politics that neither political party seemed willing to try to extirpate it.
While Jim Brown profited from this political turf war, he soon realized that the real power was not in the contracting business, but within Jamaica's corrupt political structure.
So you became involved in organized crime through the president of Jamaica?
Man, he the biggest crook on the island. When I seen how President Seaga had all this power, I decided I need to get closer to the top. So I pick up a gun and I start to work for Seaga as an enforcer. I was good with a gun. The people on the street, they know my name. They're afraid of me. Soon I become Seaga's bodyguard and right-hand man. Now when the election comes and Seaga wins, that's good for me. I could get some of that power too. And for the other side, we got rid of them quick.
After President Seaga won the 1980 election, the gunmen that helped him to gain power became a force in their own right. Brown is Seaga's right-hand man, becoming Don of Jamaica's underworld. His rivals were running scared.
And these gangsters began to go out of Jamaica after the 1980 election when they were essentially on the run for their lives. They saw that Seaga had won. Anybody who had fired shots for the PNP, the rival party, knew that they really had to get out of Jamaica.
With the competition gone, Jim Brown's power grew. He had established himself as a godfather of Jamaica's drug mafia. But the war on drugs was beginning in the United States, and law enforcement was cracking down on Jamaica's greatest export, marijuana.
They can't get the shipments through, so now we got a big load of ganja sitting on the docks in Kingston.
Does it surprise you that the Americans don't want you shipping drugs to their country?
You don't understand nothing, man! If the ganja don't go out, then a lot of Jamaicans gonna be hungry. But I know a lot of people now in places in Jamaica and Miami, in places in the States. So that's when I start shipping the ganja out, and then the money starts to come in.
So you got rich.
Everybody got some of the money. Posses aren't just gangs. We're like the guys we used to see in those movies back in Kingston. We made our own justice.
There is a gun culture in Jamaican society. There is a fascination for guns, and of course one of the things about guns is that when you put guns in the hands of poor people or sufferer youths, it is a form of empowerment. You know, it gives them a sense that they have control over life and death.
What was happening on the streets downtown in Kingston was a growing fascination with the Hollywood silver screen, and primarily the outlaws and cowboys and bandits that came out of Hollywood in the 50s and 60s and early 70s. The gangsters, who were by then up and coming in the ranks of both parties, began to style themselves after these cowboy heroes, and that became the real kind of emotional substance that the gangs carried to Kingston's poor. That was just something that Jamaicans adored, because their own lives were nasty and short, and when they looked at Hollywood movies, they felt as if those movies were really telling the story of their lives.
Brown quickly formed his Jamaican connections into an organized crime group called the Shower Posse. Named for their ability to shower their enemies with bullets, the group brought havoc to the United States. Brown decided to expand his drug-dealing operations.
So, once you were in control in Jamaica, what made you decide to return to the United States? Or was it the money again?
The Shaw was making money. We were selling in Washington, New York, Miami. We were making money hand over fist. But there were a lot of other gunmen from Jamaica trying to sell drugs. We had to get rid of them.
Get rid of them?
There was this reggae club where those guys went. We followed them.
You just, forgive the pun, showered them with bullets, even the innocent bystanders.
Anybody who goes against me, they're gonna die.
People have asked, if these men are so violent, and if they kill so many of their own in the line of duty, so to speak, why is it that Jamaicans see them as heroic, as Robin Hood, defenders of the poor? And the reason for this, and it's really the most important, I think, salient fact, the drug trade became the only game in town. These men like Jim Brown and his Shower Posse, became the people, the only people, who were putting shoes on the feet of children, who were putting roofs over people's heads, so that when somebody needs money to pay a child's school entrance fee, they're going to turn to their local posse. That's who they're going to go to for help, because they can't go to the government anymore.
Like these fools in some crack house in Miami. When we rolled up in front of the place, I just felt this anger. I burst in and shot the guy. But there was this woman there.
She was pregnant. That was very brave of you.
I did what I had to do. Look, a man tried to mash my corn. He better know I'm gonna mash his corn back, and his whole field, too.
And did President Sayaga know about all of this? The corn mashing, as you put it?
Who you think I learned it from?
The Shower Posse was gaining wealth and power through the drug trade, but the very tools they used to enforce their grip on their turf would prove to be their undoing.
We needed the guns to keep control. But when they were used too much in the States, then we shipped them down to Jamaica so we could use them again. We packed them away good to hide them from customs. I don't know how. found all those guns.
At that point, he was also sending firearms back to Jamaica. In 1984, the Shower did send down to Jamaica an enormous shipment of firearms that wound up on the Kingston wharves, and someone was tipped off, and so the person who was to claim it never did. When they opened the barrel and found these high-powered weapons, this was the first time that Interpol, the International Police Organization, was called in to try to track the source of these guns. And it was discovered that some of these same guns that had been sent in this barrel back to Jamaica had been used in homicides in the United States. And it was really that shipment of guns to Jamaica in 1984 that first alerted international law enforcement to the presence of the posses.
Once law enforcement identified the Shower Posse, they began to target them for prosecution as an organized crime group.
The RICO statute is a statute aimed at corrupt organizations, racketeering influenced corrupt organizations, and it's designed to target an organization, legitimate or illegitimate, that is corrupt in some way. A coordinated effort led by the New York office of the FBI in conjunction with the New York City Police Department targeted numerous locations known to be used by the posse, used as either residences or warehouses for cash and guns and drugs. Numerous posse members were arrested that night, taken into federal custody. Automatic weapons were seized. Large amounts of marijuana, cocaine, and heroin were also seized.
Law enforcement was successful in breaking up the Shower Posse. Now they set their sights on its leader, Jim Brown.
So American law enforcement was beginning to feel that it could go up against these gangs and win. There had been so many homicides by that time attributed to Jim Brown and the Shower that the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the DEA, the FBI, the New York Police Department, and the Metro-Dade Police Department felt that if they could get Jim Brown back to the United States, they could prosecute him and win.
So once they found these guns and linked you to another murder, they didn't charge you, but deported you to Jamaica to stand trial?
I was President Seaga's right-hand man. I'm an untouchable.
So you were just let off for these murders?
I keep Jamaica running. Of course they're gonna let me go. But now the United States try to extradite me for those things I've done with Shower Posse.
They put pressure on President Seaga. If he didn't extradite you, Jamaica would have suffered. I'm afraid the courts won't be so easy on you. The Americans take a very dim view of this sort of thing.
I put Seaga where he is today. He wouldn't be president of Jamaica without me. I did most of those crimes for him. He wants to lock me away when he is just as guilty as me.
I get a sense you feel betrayed.
Oh, you got that right, man.
If it's any consolation, you're not alone. President Seaga betrayed his oath of office, his country, his people, and of course, the suffering youth.
Hey, time's up. Gotta go.
Unfortunately, he had assistance, didn't he, Mr. Brown?
Well, he better think twice about sending me, because they're gonna have a lot of questions about him. And I got a lot of answers.
Before the United States Marshals arrived to pick up Brown, he was mysteriously killed in jail, burned alive in his cell.
Jim Brown was going to be extradited to stand trial in the United States. Edward Seaga knew that if he were allowed to go back to the United States and talk, he would tell the federal authorities everything he knew about his connections to Seaga and the Jamaica Labor Party and the ways in which the party had aided and abetted the Shower Posse's exploits in the United States. Jim Brown was burned to death in a fire in his cell at Kingston's General Penitentiary in February of 1992 as U.S. federal marshals were waiting to take him back aboard a plane to Miami. When an enterprising young reporter at the funeral asked Mr. Seaga if Jim Brown had enjoyed the backing of a politician, Seaga all but lost his temper with this man and said that Jim Brown had been a defender of his community and a hero to the poor, and that sooner or later Jamaicans would realize that such men were really heroic. I think what you can say about Jim Brown was that if you were a supporter, you adored him, and if you were an adversary, you were terrified of him.
In China, organized crime is as old as the country itself. As with various other old world nations, Chinese organized crime was always part of the culture. The exodus of the Chinese in the 1800s exported Asian organized crime to the rest of the world. Soon Chinese syndicates were everywhere. They called themselves the Triads. Triads began when a Chinese emperor ordered the extermination of monks who were supreme martial arts masters. After their temple was burned and their members massacred, the surviving monks went underground. In fact, the term triad is derived from the triangle the monks used to represent heaven, earth, and man. With the fall of the last emperor, this secret organization prospered and established close connections to political figures who recruited the triad members as bodyguards and secret police. While triads performed a useful function, the arrival of the Communist Party in China spelled their doom. Party leader Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution aimed to cleanse China of its old regime, including the Triads. When Chiang Kai-shek fled with his army to Taiwan, the Triads had found a perfect sanctuary.
After 1949, the Triads only had one place to go, or two places, really, to Hong Kong and then to Taiwan. And so they reestablished their ties with Taiwan. Chiang Kai-shek was able to utilize them as secret police. He was able to use them as hitmen when he began his rampage against the communists. Like every other political organization anywhere, you need some muscle. And he turned to them because they're the most logical people to turn to. Generally, they played in very, very well with politics. Now, there is a connection between politics and the triad, but the triad has its place, and it has been used repeatedly by the politicians in China over the past 50 years. In fact, they still are.
It was in Taiwan that the Triads began to take on a more sinister form.
The first thing you have to understand is that the Triads aren't really gangs. They operate under a strict code of conduct and loyalty. They're all blood brothers. There's actually a ceremony where they mix each other's blood in tea and drink it.
An investigative reporter who wishes to remain anonymous for his own safety became familiar with Taiwan's underworld while working on a story about the country's largest triad, United Bamboo.
That's when I decided to go after the head of United Bamboo. They called him White Wolf. And half of me wanted to see this guy busted. But I'm not a cop. I wanted his story. His real name was Shang Ang Lo, and in his mid-50s, he was the honorary godfather of the 24 Tongs, or gangs. With the billions he made in the various triad rackets, he could afford to keep himself in style.
The reporter began with his triad contacts in Taiwan's underworld. Through a careful series of meetings with the lieutenants of the United Bamboo Triad, he gained their trust.
The Triads are organized under the headman or dragon head. You have different members responsible for such things as swearing in new soldiers, leading men into gang warfare, acting as liaisons between different triad groups. Under them are the soldiers and new recruits. Man, they're not just a gang. Everyone has his place, and if you step out of line, you pay the price.
The reporter was finally cleared to meet the White Wolf, but with one condition. He was to come alone, and the White Wolf's face would not be shown.
But he wasn't some flashy thug. He had 5 undergraduate degrees to his name. He was also bilingual, in English and Chinese.
Tracking the leader of the Triads through the maze of the Chinese underworld seemed nearly impossible. Eventually, the reporter's persistence paid off. Or perhaps it was simply that the White Wolf had nothing to fear.
Yes, Mr. Shang. Lately, we've all heard about the government crackdown on an organized crime group such as United Bamboo.
Organized crime? You're mistaken. I am president of an investment company, the Strategy Group, similar to thousands of Triad brothers who own legitimate concerns. They're simply arresting anyone who's a Triad.
With all due respect, Mr. Shang, what about the construction bids the Strategy Group rids through intimidation and government corruption?
Politicians who have interest in construction rig bids too.
The Triads had a contractor bid on a freeway construction job. He was up against a legitimate businessman. Of course, the legitimate man's bid was lower. Triads have to inflate the budget of their project in order to get money. They intimidate the bidders, threaten to kill their families. The bidders back off. Then the government official's more than happy to hand over the contract to his Triad friends. And he looks clean. But the problem with the freeway construction job was that they skimmed so much money. There's no money left for building. Halfway through the project, a big section of the freeway just collapsed. That got the public's attention. I remember thinking, is this what I want for Taiwan? A core of corruption so rotten that the whole country collapses?
Politicians who have interest in construction rig bids too. They accept a high bid on a job and skim the profits in their own pockets. Why single out the Triad businessman? Would you rather we run opium dens and number rackets?
Basically, they'll do anything they can make money at. Prostitution, drug trafficking, gun smuggling, you name it, they're involved. But the most disturbing part of all this is that they have intertwined themselves with legitimate businesses and the government. They own big companies. They support the politicians with money and votes that are bought by the Triads. And they're all in bed together.
You rail against the politicians, but what are they left to do when the system's so corrupt?
My point exactly. What am I to do? You can't separate Triads from the government any more than you could peel yin from yang. How do you think President Lee got elected? Now he's the one leading the crackdown.
The people were in an uproar. President Lee had no choice but to turn the heat up on the Triads. There were many arrests, but the head of United Bamboo avoided capture. Whether it's the American mob or the Chinese Triads, a gang's ascent to the ranks of large criminal enterprises comes when they learn that their biggest enemy can also be their greatest ally, their own government. This has happened in Mexico, with tragic results for law enforcement. Mexico shares a 2,000-mile border with the United States, and the drug traffickers know authorities can't patrol at all. Producing and shipping drugs has become big business. For the DEA, their only hope of stopping it is to go in undercover and bust drug trafficking operations at the source. The tragic case of DEA agent Enrique Camarena is a telling indictment of the union of government and mafia drug lords.
I guess you could say I was a casualty of the war on drugs. I was a DEA agent, working undercover in Guadalajara, Mexico. Pretty gung-ho about it, too. But I guess looking back on it, the only good thing was the food.
Tracking these guys down wasn't hard. Mexico is full of hardworking families trying to make an honest living. These guys stuck out like sore thumbs.
Ernest Cartello. He was the one who built up the drug cartel. He acted as a mentor to an up-and-coming drug lord named Rafael Caro Quintero. We knew Cartello and Quintero were both trafficking tons of drugs into the States. But looking back on it, we really didn't have a clue how big this thing was.
Once I knew who the key players were, the next step was to locate their base of operations.
Flying over the countryside, Camarena searched for drug plantations and processing facilities. He spotted a vast crop at a farm called El Buffalo, a marijuana plantation in Chihuahua, owned and operated by Rafael Caro Quintero. The DEA briefed the Mexican army, and together they organized a successful raid on Quintero's operations.
But after the raid, something strange happened. All the expensive equipment at El Buffalo vanished, even though it was under armed guard. And there was another thing. This was a gigantic operation. How did the Mexican police not know about this place before? I was beginning to wonder who was protecting Quintero and just how high up his connections went.
Business, you know? That's what we're doing here. Playing business.
Caro Quintero was just a cowboy. You know, he was rough and crude and brutal.
The director of the Mexican Federal Police Force was Juan Zorilla. Camarena began to suspect that the government official was protecting Mexican drug smugglers. Despite the danger, Camarena continued with his investigation of the drug lord and his political connections.
Just be cool. It's being taken care of as we speak.
I began wondering about Zorilla. I met him one time at one of those photo ops, staged by the Mexican government. Zorilla and the DEA were teaming up to fight the war on drugs. What a joke.
There's a saying in Mexico, the mordida, which means the bite. Nothing occurs in Mexico unless somebody gets paid. Corruption is a culture in Mexico. It's endemic to the process of government. The mafia exists because the politicians and the government allow them to exist for their own enrichment.
Quintero would hold parties out at the rancho in Sinaloa, and he had a caged lion, a couple of them. And everybody'd be partying, and part of the entertainment was he'd throw snitches in the cage and they'd watch them be devoured.
It was then that Camarena made a major mistake. He trusted a Mexican cop.
They were all there, the drug lords and Zorilla, Mexico's top cop, like a fat and sassy vulture.
Enrique Camarena, you should not have put your nose in our business.
Is this the pig who busted my operations in Chihuahua?
Enrique Camarena.
Listen to me. I work for the DEA. You just kidnapped a federal agent of the United States government.
Don't worry about us, amigo.
Worry about what we're going to do to you.
You're a cop. You've got a badge.
Badge? I got no stinker badge.
How the hell can you do this? You betrayed us all and your own people for what?
Money. Mucho dinero.
Once they had captured Camarena, they were determined to find out all he knew.
Dime, what do you know? ¿Qué es lo que sabes? Dímelo. What do you know? Dímelo. ¿Qué es lo que sabes? Dímelo. Ahora, ¿qué es lo que sabes?
I was in bad shape. They didn't want me dying before I could tell them everything. So they gave me some kind of a drug to make my heart hold out longer. They wanted to know everything. The names, the details, how high up the investigation went. But I didn't talk. If I did, other agents would be in my place. But actually I wasn't thinking about anyone else. I'm no hero. I was thinking about me. You see, when there's no hope and nothing left, the only thing you got is what you have inside. And I sure as hell wasn't going to give that to them, even if it killed me.
The cowardly murder of Enrique Camarena, special agent with the Drug Enforcement Administration, was carried out by the Mexican government in conjunction, in cooperation, in partnership with the godfathers of the drug trade.
The bodies of Camarena and his pilot were found dumped on the roadside. Both had been tortured to death. U.S. law enforcement agents were outraged.
Enrique Camarena died a soldier in the drug war, but his life is not revenged with the prosecution of those people that murdered him, or those people that sanctioned that murder were officials of the Mexican government.
Camarena's murder put the heat on Mexico to clean up the rampant level of corruption. But once such a criminally controlled government is established, it's nearly impossible to eradicate. Law enforcement in the United States were equally frustrated in their efforts to put mob gangsters behind bars. Law enforcement changed tactics and began targeting the organizations.
One of the things we were looking to do was to use the RICO statute to indict the commission, the heads of the 5 New York crime families. The Organized Crime Task Force had extraordinary information as to the Lucchese family and some evidence as to the heads of 1 or 2 others. The FBI had bugs in on the heads of 3 families at the time. And so if you combine the 2, there was a mountain of evidence that could be used to indict and convict all of the family bosses.
After Jim Brown's death, the government successfully used these statutes to bring the Jamaican posse's reign of terror to an end.
The shower posse today, if it exists at all, exists as a network of people who used to be much more closely aligned in business, in their business being narcotics trafficking and weapons trafficking. As it exists today, they probably are members of, if not leaders of, smaller groups around the country who simply have a past affiliation with the shower posse.
The people of Taiwan had enough of their government's involvement with the Triads. In April 2000, President Lee was ousted. The spirit of reform swept the country. Anti-corruption laws were enacted and many triads were rounded up. In response to pressure from the United States, a warrant was issued for the arrest of Quintero. But the narcotic smuggler bribed his way out of Mexico with a check for $250,000. Quintero's immigration papers were signed by the Director of Police, Jose Zoria. After the public outcry about Mexico's political corruption, Zoria quietly resigned his post and was allowed to leave the country. Despite the efforts of a few brave officials, Mexico remains troubled by corruption. Enrique Camarena was a hero in the fight against drugs, but his death meant very little. For Mexican drug kings still rule, and narcotics still flow across the border. As we have seen in our own country and elsewhere, organized crime can be beaten with the vigilance of law enforcement and courageous politicians who do not bow to money and intimidation. The nations of the world can be free from the menace of organized crime. I'm Robert Stack. Thanks for joining us.